And welcome back to Capitol Tonight. So every election year, there are a few controversial issues that candidates simply cannot escape. Same-sex marriage, gun control, and abortion rights. These are hot-button issues that serve to draw a bright line between the candidates. And this year, abortion in particular has emerged as a central theme on the campaign trail in New York. Carl Palladino positioned himself squarely on the target of pro-choice groups when he took a strict anti-abortion position, even in the cases of rape and incest. Now, the center of this whole discussion is also at the Attorney General race, and also, as my next guest is here to explain, it could play a pivotal role in the fight for control of the state Senate. Kelli Conlin is the president of NARAL Pro-Choice New York, and she is joining us tonight from New York City. Kelli, thank you very much for your time.
Good to be here, Liz.
So this is interesting because you started out this campaign cycle being very staunchly, not against per se, but taking a strong view that because the Senate Democrats would not bring a key bill to the floor, you would not be backing any incumbents.
Right. That key bill was the Reproductive Health Act, which codifies Roe v. Wade and cleans up New York's old law from 1970 and makes it safer for women in this state to access abortion procedures. We were very upset at the end of the legislative session. We felt like the Senate Democrats were not taking this issue as seriously as we thought they should, and we didn't think that they recognized how important and valuable it was to the women of New York. Since then, we've had many intense discussions. We've talked about it. And, you know, it comes down to the fact that what we disagreed on was not the priority of the issue, but the tactics. I think from our point of view, we were fully confident that we had the votes to pass this. We knew we had some Republicans who would vote for the bill, too. And this issue has a proud history of bipartisan support. So, you know, we thought we had the votes. They didn't think we had the votes. They didn't want to bring it to the floor. But now that they've committed to bringing it to the floor in the next legislative session, you know, we feel that we can reconcile and get together and win these elections.
Okay, before we go on, first of all, you have now moved, so this is news. You have now moved to decide to endorse some of these incumbents because you've gotten an agreement from the Senate Democratic Conference leader, John Sampson, that this bill will move off the committee's calendar into the floor for a full vote. Will that be happening before or after the next legislature takes its seat? In other words, prior to January, do we know? Because Governor Patterson says he's going to be calling them back.
Right. You know, our goal at this point is to re-elect John Sampson as the head of the Democratic Conference and re-elect the Democrats as the head of the Senate. And so we're looking toward next legislative cycle. Obviously, if the Republicans were to gain control of the Senate chamber, all bets would be off, and then we would look at other kinds of options. But at this point, we fully expect the Democrats to be in control and for this to be a bill that's on their docket for the next legislative session.
When you say codifies Roe v. Wade, what do you mean by that, and why is it specifically necessary? Because New York is a blue state, and it's not as if abortion rights are imminently in danger of being taken away in this state.
Well, it's important to have a law here that will protect the women here if Roe is under assault. I mean, I don't think people realize how close we are to losing it. I'm not an alarmist, and yet you look at the makeup of the Supreme Court, Anthony Kennedy is no Sandra Day O'Connor, and he's the swing vote. At the very best scenario, we're a vote away from losing it nationally, and so New York needs to remain strong. We need to be true to our values. We have an old law that predates Roe, but there are some flaws in it. Women who have sort of tragic circumstances now need to leave the state because hospitals are not recognizing Roe as surpassing the old New York law, which did not have a health exception for women. That's one of the key components.
Tragic circumstances means late term. Is that what we're talking about?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's those circumstances where there's severe fetal anomalies, where a fetus is not going to survive, really rare instances, but still in those cases, at this point, a lot of hospitals who worry about liability issues are not recognizing Roe and are pointing to New York's old law, which only has a life exception and does not allow for women's health. So they worry about the liability issues of proving that her life was in danger.
You know, speaking of liability, actually, but now from a political standpoint, you guys are are deciding to endorse 24 of the 32 seats. There's actually one Democrat retiring, but incumbent Dems.
Right.
And you're staying out of two races where you have some friendly Republicans. We'll get to them in a minute. But do you not think, I mean, a cynical person would say, okay, you're a little bit gambling because you're going to go all in for the Democrats, and as you mentioned, it's possible the Republicans might win. It's a very difficult year for everyone, for incumbents in particular, and then you won't get what you were hoping for. Why not push them to do it this year? So they didn't want to because they were nervous that it would be a liability for them, politically speaking.
Well, I mean, we always gamble. I mean, we've been some of the unluckiest gamblers. You even look at the history of this bill. This bill started out as a Spitzer bill. It was a governor's bill.
Right.
Then it went on. Actually, few people know this, but you know this, Liz, that this bill was actually on the docket to be voted on the day after the coup occurred in the Senate. And so, you know, it was all wrapped up in the politics of that because the Republicans did not want to make their marginal members, who clearly have pro-choice constituencies, vote on this bill. So, you know, it was all tied up in that. Are we taking a gamble? Yes, but we believe we've been partners with the Senate Democrats for many, many years. That's not to say that we're not working hard and meeting with Republicans, fully intent on building a bigger base of pro-choice Republican support in the Senate and the Assembly. And I actually think if Mike Long's sort of grip on the Senate is loosened this year because of the statewide elections, you're going to see a remarkably different scenario. You look at states like Massachusetts, Connecticut, very different makeups. You see 40% of their Republicans are pro-choice Republicans. That's what we want to look for. But at this point, we also recognize that it's the Democratic Conference which really holds the values of choice dear, holds women's rights dear, and will do everything they can to make sure that this bill and other bills that's important to women pass next year.
So there are two Republicans, and they are Roy McDonald and John Bonasek. Roy McDonald's in the Capital Region, Bonasek in the Hudson Valley, who you are staying out of their races. Now, John Bonasek doesn't have a very difficult race, but there is a challenger for Roy McDonald, and it's Joanne Yepsen, and I believe she's pretty good on choice. I mean, why are you staying out of those races?
Well, we're staying out because, you know, we may not agree on everything all the time, as we haven't with Senator Bonasek, and yet they've been good friends, and we're looking toward building relationships. You know, there are other senators that historically have been with us, too, and, you know, during the last two legislative cycles, we really worked hard to build relationships and foster new inroads with them. I mean, you'll fully remember that when Joe Bruno was the head of the Senate, we actually were able to get things done and had plenty of Republicans coming over to vote for reproductive health measures. So we're not giving up on the Republicans in the Senate, but we've made a clear decision that we do believe that under the Democratic leadership of the Senate body that it's going to be much, much better for reproductive health issues. And so that's why we're throwing our whole lot, and we're very proud to support John Sampson and the Senate Democratic leadership.
So you also have backed 8 Democratic challenger candidates, we should also say. What will you be doing for your chosen candidates in terms of cash and independent expenditures? We have already seen some ads that the organization is doing in the statewide races, which we'll move on to in a second. But how much are you willing to spend to help the Democrats keep the majority?
You know, I'm reluctant to give out figures because then our opponents hear those figures. But I will say this, that it's been multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. We went to the mat for the Senate Democrats last election cycle, and we understand this election cycle. There's a lot at stake in New York, and so we're going to be putting staff members into elections long term. We're going to be putting massive volunteer efforts. We're going to be, you know, up in the media. We dedicated a media budget. I'm not on that side because there are lines about coordinated staff members and those who are doing the uncoordinated independent work. But you can be guaranteed we're going to have a very visible presence in these Senate races. So
you've also been, the entire sort of pro-choice community has been very outspoken against the gubernatorial candidate Carl Palladino, who says that he opposes abortion rights, period, in the case of rape and incest, which is a pretty extreme position, although not unique necessarily to him. There's a couple of candidates out there this year saying that. He also says that it's a personal choice for him and that he would not seek to overturn the law in New York. I mean, there are a number of people who would say this is intensely personal, if not a religious issue. I mean, what do you say to those people?
Well, it is a religious issue for people, but from our point of view, it's also a moral values issue in as much as, I mean, there are values at stake. Someone who would actually make the victim of rape face her accuser and not allow that person to have access to make a decision about whether she wanted to keep the pregnancy or not. To us, that's a values issue that flies in the face of all of the history of New York's values on fundamental rights to privacy and fundamental rights to human dignity. So, you know, we just feel like Carl Palladino is really out of step with the values of New York State. And while, you know, states like Utah and Louisiana elect candidates who reflect the values of those states, which are very extreme anti-choice, that New York State actually has a proud history of supporting reproductive health and rights, and since 1994 have elected pro-choice candidates to statewide office. And so we are very vigorous and proud in our support of our wonderful pro-choice champion, Andrew Cuomo, who will be a fantastic governor for this issue.
And what about Dan Donovan, the Republican Attorney General candidate? I mean, we're seeing choice become a major issue, more than I've seen in recent years in New York, because again, there has been sort of this assumption in New York that choice is not necessarily under siege where it might be in other states where you've seen, for example, activist attorneys general who have tried really to overturn or at least curtail the ability of women to have access to reproductive health services.
Well, I think that the fundamental difference, Liz, is that what you're seeing in New York right now is the most anti-choice, extreme statewide ticket than we have seen in our lifetimes. I mean, when you look at the past 6, 8, 10 election cycles, even going further back, you know, Democrats and Republicans have been fairly moderate. You look at the Republicans who have run statewide, and for the most part, they've been moderate Republicans because they know how hard it is to get elected in New York if you're not upholding the values of New Yorkers. A poll that was commissioned last year showed that 75% of New Yorkers want the Reproductive Health Act to pass, including 55% of upstate Republicans. So this is a shared, uniform value, and we're really proud to live in a state that understands the values of protecting women's privacy and dignity. And so we're, you know, battling it out because the candidates on the Republican ticket fly in the face of those values.
Well, we are, of course, going to see a lot more of this, I believe, a lot more discussion of choice where this came from. But also, again, I want to thank you, and appreciate you for coming on the show this evening, breaking some news with us. You have now decided to end your stalemate with the Senate Democrats and endorse 24 incumbents. So thanks very much for telling us about that, Kelli Conlin.
Good to be here. Thanks, Liz.
Be well.